You see them everywhere, right? On social media, in stores, supplements promising thicker, fuller hair. But let's be real, a big question always hangs in the air. Is there any actual science behind these claims, or is it all just really, really good marketing? Well, today we're going to dive into a rigorous scientific study to see what the evidence has to say.
You know that feeling? That moment you look at your hairbrush or down at the shower drain and you see, well, a little more hair than you'd like. It's honestly pretty stressful, and it can make you wonder what's going on.
If that sounds familiar, the first thing you should know is that you are definitely not alone. This kind of excessive hair shedding is super common, and yep, it has a specific clinical name.
Okay, so what is this common culprit behind this kind of hair loss, especially in women? Let's get right to the root of the problem.
It's called Telogen Effluvium. Let's just call it TE for short. So here's the deal. Your hair follicles are supposed to follow a cycle of growing and resting. What happens with TE is that some kind of stressor, and that can be anything from physical illness to major emotional stress, basically shocks a whole bunch of your hair follicles, pushing them into the resting phase all at once. Then, a couple months later, all those resting hairs fall out, and that's when you notice the shedding.
So if TE is the problem, what's the solution? Well, since the causes are kind of complex, the fix probably needs to be pretty comprehensive too. You see, science tells us that TE isn't caused by just one thing. Think of it less like flipping a single light switch and more like you're conducting a whole orchestra. You've got hormones, nutrition, stress, inflammation, they're all playing their own part. So to get a good result, healthy hair, you can't just focus on one instrument. You have to get the whole orchestra playing in harmony.
And this is basically what that orchestra looks like in practice. The approach that was tested in this study, it didn't just target one thing. No, it was designed to tackle the problem from all angles. To fight oxidative stress, they used antioxidants like vitamin E. For inflammation, they used things like curcuma longa. To fill in any nutritional gaps, they added hair-building blocks like amino acids and biotin. And to manage stress, they brought in adaptogens like ashwagandha. They even looked at gut health and other growth pathways. It's the whole shebang.
Okay, that all sounds great, right? It sounds super smart, but we live in a world that is just flooded with wellness claims. So how do you actually separate a good theory from, well, wishful thinking? How do you get real proof?
Well, you do it by putting the whole thing through the ultimate scientific test, the absolute gold standard of clinical trials.
And this is so important. The researchers who did this study even said it themselves. There just aren't that many high-quality studies out there for these kinds of supplements. A lot of them are too small, too short, or they don't have the right controls, which makes it hard to trust the results. And that's exactly what makes this particular study so interesting.
So here's how they set it up. It's called a randomized controlled trial, or RCT. They found 106 women who were all diagnosed with TE. Then they randomly split them into two groups. For 6 whole months, one group got the actual supplement, and the other group got a placebo, a fake one that looked and tasted exactly the same. And here's the secret sauce. It was double-blind. That means neither the women in the study nor the doctors running it had any idea who was getting the real deal and who was getting the placebo. That way, nobody's hopes or expectations can mess with the results.
And this chart just lays it all out beautifully. You can see the 106 people getting split into the two groups. But you know what's really amazing? Over 6 entire months, not one single person dropped out. That's pretty rare, and it tells you a lot about how well this study was run.
All right, so after 6 months of this super rigorous, double-blind testing, it was finally time to crunch the numbers and see what actually happened.
This is the moment of truth, right? Did the group that was taking the real supplement actually see a real, measurable improvement compared to the group that was basically just taking a sugar pill?
And the answer is a big, clear yes. So the main thing they were looking for was hair density. And this chart shows the change in how many hairs there were per square centimeter. Now, the placebo group did see a small increase, which you'd expect because hair grows in cycles. But look at the active group. They saw a much, much bigger increase, over 27 more hairs. The difference was what scientists call statistically significant, which is just a fancy way of saying it's basically impossible that it happened by random chance. But density is only one piece of the puzzle. To really see what's going on, scientists look at the ratio of growing hairs to resting hairs. On a healthy scalp, you want a really high ratio, way more hairs in the growing phase. With TE, that ratio gets all out of whack. So the real goal isn't just more hair, it's getting that ratio back to a healthy balance.
And this chart might be the most incredible result of the whole study. The active group started out with a ratio of about 8 growing hairs for every 1 resting hair, pretty typical for TE. But after 6 months, look at that jump. It went all the way up to over 14 to 1. That's not just better, that's squarely in the range of a normal, healthy scalp. And the placebo group, it barely budged. This is huge. It means the supplement wasn't just growing more hair, it was actually fixing the entire hair growth cycle.
I mean, numbers and charts are great, but sometimes you just need to see it, right? And here you go. These are actual photos from people in the active group. On the left is day 0, before they started, and on the right, after 180 days. You can see a real, visible difference in the fullness and coverage. This is where those stats become real life.
So, what does this all mean when we zoom out? What's the big takeaway from a study like this?
Let's just boil it all down to one single powerful number, 91%. By the end of this study, over 91% of the hair follicles in the active group were in the active growth phase. To put that in perspective, that's the same percentage you'd find on a completely healthy scalp with no hair loss issues at all. It was a total reset.
Look, the most important takeaway here isn't really about one specific product. It's about the process. It's about showing what happens when a company actually invests in serious, high-quality, placebo-controlled, double-blind research. We get real, trustworthy answers. And that is what lets us all make smart, informed choices.
Which really leaves us with one last big question. In an industry that is so full of hype and clever marketing, is this what we should all start demanding? Should this kind of rigorous, transparent, objective science become the new normal, the non-negotiable standard before we decide what to believe and what to buy? It seems like the power, really, is in asking for the proof.